Hi, and welcome to this episode to you from wherever in the world you're listening or watching from. In this episode of the Radical Awareness podcast, Nicole and I interview one of our teachers, one of our mentors, Kristine Weber from Subtle Yoga. We have been working with Kristine Weber with Subtle Yoga's trainings and information for a number of years now, and Kristine really was a catalyst for the shift that we took or were taking towards a slower, more subtle, you could say, approach to the yoga practice, to our way of teaching, and it very much informed our move in the direction of trauma-informed and opening our eyes to a neuroscience-based approach to teaching yoga, to learning about yoga, and led us in the direction of understanding a lot more about the nervous system, polyvagal theory, and all of these other wonderful things that we talk about in the world of trauma-informed yoga. So we feel very privileged to be having this conversation with one of our mentors. She has also been a trailblazer in getting a little bit more recognition and understanding around how yoga can be beneficial for mental health and getting that information into healthcare systems and healthcare practitioners in the US. And so we talk about these things as well. You can follow her stuff, and there's plenty to follow on Instagram, Subtle Yoga, on Facebook, Subtle Yoga with Kristine Weber, and her website is subtleyoga.com, where you'll find a whole lot of resources around slow yoga and how beneficial it is. Her teacher training, online teacher trainings are there, and she runs an online community and brings us lots of new information all of the time. So we're really excited about this conversation, and I hope you are too. So sit back and enjoy our chat. And if you do enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share, and do all of those things that help us get this information a little bit further.
The Radical Awareness Podcast
with Nicole and John Allen. Oh, and before I forget, Kristine has offered us some freebies. So if you check out the links in the show notes, she has some stuff for you that will introduce you to her work and some of the things she's passionate about right at this moment. So do go and check that out in the description or the show notes, depending on what platform you are listening or watching on. Do check it out. Here's the interview. Okay, so welcome back to a very special edition of the Radical Awareness Podcast. We have a very exciting guest in today's episode. It is Kristine Weber. You might know her from subtleyoga.com. Or the many other ventures she is involved in. I'm going to hand the mic pretty much straight to her to do a little bit of a self-intro to let us know how long she's been in this yoga world.
Hang on, I've already got something to say. I just want to also say that we've been following Kristine's work maybe for 5 or 6 years now,
True.
Your work, Kristine, and have done many of your online courses and trainings, and even had the great pleasure of meeting you in person during your brief stint living in New Zealand. It was very exciting for us, and it is truly a privilege to be able to have this conversation and allow our wisdom to share together, you know, and come forth. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. And I just love you both so much. And I'm thrilled about the work you're doing. Just a thank you for having me on. And just briefly, I started doing yoga in 6th grade, which was in the 1970s. I had a hippie social studies teacher, and she taught us yoga club. And I had some deep experiences when I was a child. Maybe I could even call them spiritual experiences, but I didn't have a context for them. but I still use some of the practices I learned from my sixth grade social studies teacher today. And then I had a really good friend in college. Her name was Maria Kirsten. Many of you know her from her teaching in Australia and New Zealand. And so Maria this was the late 80s, and Maria would be like, come on, let's go to yoga. And I'd be like, I hope nobody sees us, because it was really not trendy back then. But she dragged me along. She was an extraordinary person at a young age. So we were like 22 or 23, and she was extraordinary at that time, in that she knew how important yoga was for self-care. And she taught me a lot about self-care when I was a young person. So I really got into yoga kind of at that time. I got a little deeper into it. And then I lived in California for a while, got a little deeper. And then I lived in Asia for 4 years in my 20s. So that was, I lived in Japan for a couple of years. When I was in Japan, I was like, I need a yoga teacher. And I found a Japanese yoga teacher, and she didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Japanese. Well, my Japanese was getting a little better at that point, but I still didn't understand most of what she was saying, but I just kind of followed along. That was kind of fun. And then I met some sannyasins, some, renunciates from India when I was in Japan, and that inspired me. I really wanted to go to India. I spent about 8 months in India and Nepal, traveling and staying at ashrams and studying and learning. This was all in the early 90s, mid 90s. When I got back to the States, it was 1995, and it was an interesting time for yoga. I was living about an hour. I was about an hour outside of New York City. So I was getting some of the trickle down from what was happening in New York. And it was interesting. I remember the first yoga class I went to, like coming back when yoga had started to become trendy. So like there was this clear line between the yoga I was doing in the 70s and 80s, and even in Japan, and then what happened when I got back to the States in 1995, which was basically that Ashtanga yoga had spawned vinyasa. And that had started to kind of gain some traction as part of the fitness world. So I went to a couple of classes, and I remember just being like, oh my God, I couldn't, I was just shocked, like, by how fast everything was, by people massaging my neck in Shavasana. I was like, what is that? And by like the teacher, was wearing like a big t-shirt and some, like, remember those Thai pants that were really popular in the 90s, like the big wide leg pants. She was wearing those when I got there, and then she whipped them off and they're coming back. There you go. And I remember her whipping them off, and she was basically wearing like a bikini top and short shorts. And I was like, what? Like, it just not what I had experienced. So I was very kind of taken aback, because I didn't understand what was going on. And I started to explore and go to more classes and be like, oh, this is okay. I see what's happening here. This trend is picking up. It was interesting teaching yoga in 1995, because I would put a sign up at the grocery store and be like, yoga class, and like 30 people would show up. Like it was a really, like, it was starting to become popular, but there weren't a lot of teachers then. It certainly wasn't saturated at that point. So anyway, then I was teaching in New Jersey, then I moved to Asheville, North Carolina in 2001 with my Kiwi husband. I had met the Kiwi along the way.
I was going to prompt you to put the New Zealander into the story.
Yeah. When did you train? When was your yoga training?
When was my training?
Yeah, like when did you first train to teach?
So at that time, in the early 90s.
Time. Yeah.
The training was not set, but the training was Gurukul still.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Which means like you live in the house of the teacher, and you kind of like pick up, but then you learn, like I would learn how to cook dal, stuff like that. And I did some of that in India, but I also did like a more formal program for maybe 6 weeks at an ashram in Mexico. And that was like in 94, I think. Okay. 95, maybe it's 95. I can't remember, but it was around that time. So that was my first sort of training, but there wasn't, yoga lines didn't exist. So like, it was really different back then. But I started doing it. I started taking a bunch of workshops like right away when I got back, because they're mostly at that time, it was still like Iyengar workshops. and so I took a few Iyengar and I was like, oh yeah, it's not, it was very different. And also like, it was too physically rigid for my body. My body didn't like it. I liked Qigong. Like I had studied Qigong in California. I liked that sort of fluid, breath-centered stuff. So, and that's what I learned in India too. So I took workshops, but there weren't a lot offered then, and it was different. So anyway, then I met the Kiwi. That was when did we meet? 97, and we got married in 98. And he moved here. So, which was probably really stupid of me, I could have lived in New Zealand. I could have lived in Auckland. But anyway, we he wanted to be here, as you know, very well. A lot of Kiwis leave and kind of explore the big world. So we did try to come back during the pandemic, and it just it was great. I loved being there. I think I loved it more than my husband did.
You were exploring. He was like,
oh no, this is
No, he was happy to be back because he feels super connected to the land and the Maori. He feels like very connected to the culture in New Zealand. But he is now a licensed clinical social worker. So he does psychotherapy. And that's going to segue into what we're talking about today with mental health, because he went through some of the hoops to get his licensure. Actually, I think he got his licensure in New Zealand eventually, but it was just not it's like the profession isn't as robust there, So he got to the point where he was like, well, I could still see clients online, but I think that's going to be tricky, and we should go back. And I started having problems because most of my business is online, and I was having problems with my Facebook ads as well as my Facebook account, because Facebook, which I didn't know, we learned so many things after 90 days, Facebook is like, you're not in where you say you are. So we're going to freeze things. And so it just got to the place where I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. So we have to go back. Oh, sad. I have to do my Indian tears. Indian classical dance. It was really hard to leave. So anyway, that's kind of where I
asked a question about because we've been interested in the kind of Vini Yoga lineage and this influence of Desikachar. When did that influence come to you? Was it through Gary Kraftsau, or I don't know if that's how you say his name properly, or somewhere else?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that question. So when I got back to the States, I had started taking some of those vinyasa classes, and I was like, I need to be a bit more discerning about what I'm studying here, because that was just not right for my body. I knew right out of the gate. I didn't want to fling myself around in sun salutations. It just didn't feel right to me. So I started looking for other yoga studios, and I found a studio in Philadelphia, which is pretty close to where I was living in New Jersey. And it was called Yoga on Main. And they taught Vini Yoga. And I went there and I took a couple classes. This is 95, 96. I took some classes there, and I was like, oh, this makes complete sense to me. This is how I want to practice.
Yeah.
So I started studying that more. I actually didn't meet Gary till after his brain surgery, which was in 2003. I think he had his surgery. So I had studied with a few other Vini Yoga teachers from Desikachar's lineage. Now, it's a little tricky in the United States because Vini Yoga, actually, I think that copyright is owned by Gary. I think Desikachar passed it to him for the United States.
Yeah.
So it's a little complicated, but there's plenty of other Desikachar teachers here. So I took classes with several and some workshops. And then I started studying with Gary, maybe in 2004. I think 2004, I started studying with his ex-wife, Mirka, and I took several workshops from him. But the challenge at that time, and it's good that things have changed now, the challenge at that time is you had to, if you wanted to do his teacher training, you had to take 2 weeks out of your life to be in the ashram with him. And I had a infant, I had a baby in 2004 that I was not willing to leave, and plus the other piece that's challenging is it's very expensive, and I didn't have the revenue to study with him early in my teaching career, as you know very well. Like, this is a labor of love. It's a mission, or a vocation, if you like, and that was so. It was really hard for me to get. I read a lot of books and I took trainings and stuff, but I took workshops and stuff. But to actually do the training, I didn't do it until 2013. I started at 2012, maybe. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So to kind of segue into the main topic, if there is such a thing. We see this kind of yoga being pretty much in its infancy in the West. But what we look at is these kind of these two-ish main arms. Of one is the exercise vibe that kind of populates into the gyms and whatnot. And then the kind of more maybe esoteric stuff that can get a little bit, as we were talking about earlier, spiritual bypassy. And so what we'd love to know is about how your journey of kind of bringing this together with a little bit more integrity, of how it folds in. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah. But I think it is speaking directly to mental health, or this idea of, the trauma informed that we talk a lot about, and that what we're seeing, I know that there was an article, a study, something that John read, where it was like 80% of people are going to yoga for their mental health and are getting recommended to do this. And it's like, well, with all the different offerings out there, what actually is supporting mental health, and maybe what is not supporting mental health, because they are very different in what can be offered. And if you're kind of going for this intensive spiritual practice to, depending on the perspective, working towards enlightenment is different to, I just want to actually feel in my body and start to reclaim who I am as a human. You sort of need different practices, right? So we're very interested.
Contrast between the goal of effectively leaving your body or getting beyond the body to the goal of actually grounding in your body, being in your body, those two different kind of things.
Or even, and we're talking, it's like from the chakra system, it's this idea when we've seen so many people who are so interested in these ones up, I want to be in my upper chakras. That's where all of my spiritual experiences are going to happen. And we say to people a lot, you've got to arrive in all of them in your body, or you're basically just going to have psychosis. That's not going to be a fun thing. This idea of what is mental health, how is this supporting, and all of the kind of confusion, because, and like what you've just explained, how quickly yoga has landed in the West and just gone, and then we're all trying to kind of regroup and understand.
I had a teacher once in Japan, actually, a yoga teacher. She was a renunciate, and she said to me, I'm leaving. And I said, why? She decided to leave her robes behind, and stop being a nun. And I said, why? And she said, because you got to have an ego before you surrender it. And she hadn't found it yet. She hadn't found herself yet. I was like, good for you, So, and I think it's the same thing. Like, you have to be in your body before you transcend it. All of that. This is the dualism precedes non-dualism. It has to.
Yes.
It has to be part of the maturation process, I think. So, but to go back to that first point, John, that you made, like yoga being in its infancy, that's an interesting comment, because I was talking to a friend the other day who is an old friend from yoga. We met in 2001 in Asheville, and she taught yoga at that time. And I said, are you thinking about teaching yoga again? She said, oh God, no. And I said, why not? And she said, because yoga used to be counterculture and now it's mainstream.
Yeah.
I was like, that's really interesting. She's like, I don't want to do something mainstream. And, when you get on Instagram, and you see, you see what's out there. It's, yesterday I just saw a random video of a woman young woman who was saying, 5 years ago, I was really anxious and now I'm not. And you can follow my yoga method. And then the next video I saw from her was she was washing her hair and promoting the shampoo she was washing her hair with. And, like, right, like that's what we're seeing now, because like, I think we have to be really, really prioritize discernment, viveka, like we are living in this time of like mountains of misinformation. It's not just a little a little sprinkle. It's mountains of misinformation. And, and then TikTok, the TikTokification of mental health, I like to call it, what we get there are these short videos of like, do this acupressure point, do this massage, do this, breathing practice. And then people get a lot of anxiety because they're overwhelmed by all the things they're supposed to do every day that TikTok is telling them about. Right. So, it's really a difficult time, I think, for people for many reasons. But one of them is that we don't have these longer, deeper conversations. We don't have these, we don't value long practice anymore. It's like, we'll just use this app for meditation and follow this 5-minute meditation. You can check that off your to-do list, for your self-care. Self-care has been overly packaged. We have all of that stuff right now that is, I think, really eroding the potential for having deep spiritual growth, So I think that's an issue. I think that's a big issue that we need to have a bit more discernment about. And then, and we've also got the issue of like yoga being mainstream now and watered down, and gosh knows what it is. And, I talk to people who work at clinics, mental health clinics, and they say people come in now, the clients come in and you'll be like, okay, so let's work with some breath. And they're like, oh, we already know all that stuff. We learned it on TikTok, so, right. And so they blowing it off before they've actually given it a chance to land and start to change them. I don't know. Are you seeing stuff like this in New Zealand or am I just?
Yeah.
We spend time like with clients, they'll come in and it's kind of like, oh no, nothing works. And I'm like, okay, so has anyone told you how slow this process is, right? And what an actual win looks like, that just having the slightest change can be actually a huge win, and that this is a lifestyle. And when you're putting things in, it's little things daily that you can achieve, and that you're actually tracking your own system the entire time. We're not just doing this, like you say, a tick. I'm going to do my meditation and tick it off and then I should feel better, but then go and live my life in the same way I've been living it. And it is a lot of time just reframing it, like reframing. And I was talking to a student last night who's actually a therapist, and because we're running trauma sensitive yoga, and that's a whole interesting thing in itself, who comes, what people know, but not knowing actually how to practice or to implement in their lives. And she said, she's like, a lot of clients ask me for trauma sensitive yoga. She's like, but I'm terrified to recommend it because I don't actually trust any of the yoga teachers. That's perfect as a therapist being like, she's like, I'm so fussy, but I've been to so many different and basically bad teachers that I can't even recommend it to clients who are looking for it. And so we just see it, all of the time. And then people who come to the courses, I had a client the other day and I was like, how did you find it? And she's like, it was really boring. And I was like, 100%, like this is a different way of approaching, when we're doing this. It is. And it's like, but what actually is boredom? What are we trying to achieve? What's your goals? And I think it was something you said actually that inspired me. I was saying to someone else, we're doing a slower, subtle practice. And I was like, don't think about it. It's not, you're not doing exercise. It's like you're flossing your subtle body. So I'm sure you said something like that.
Nice. I like that.
And even for him, he was like, oh, that's such a relief, because that's what I want to be doing. And I know that I need this resourcing and I need it every week and I need to be doing it, and having that understanding of how to reframe. So we're dealing with so many different perspectives of how people are coming to it, what they've learned, and basically unwinding it, like unwinding the wellness industry to be like, this isn't an industry, this isn't an add-on, or what we call lunchbox stickering, like putting stickers on a lunchbox. You're like, we want to open the lunchbox, right? And actually make a really nourishing lunch to put inside and then do that every day.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And even on the flip side, there's the therapist who's just almost just using the term yoga as a blanket term. Oh, just go to yoga. It's good for your mental health.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
people are reporting they're like, but I went to hot yoga and then I felt awful. Like, maybe hot yoga is not for you.
Yeah, and this is a big issue. So the education of the healthcare professionals is essential for them to understand the differentiation. And so this is my wheelhouse. And this is stuff I've been talking about for years, is getting people to understand that there's a difference between fitness, as John said. There's a difference between the ashram kind of, going for the transcendent thing. And then there's a difference between nervous system focused yoga. I tend to be in the nervous system focused yoga camp, although I like the ashram camp too, but not as many people are interested. Like when they're interested, I'll talk about it. But I tend to be in what do people need? They need to learn how to self-regulate. Yeah. And what they need to learn is the distinction between a trait change and a state change, right?
Oh,
so, right? It's huge. Because, go to Kundalini yoga and blow your head off with a bunch of hypocapnic over breathing, and you'll feel different in 15 minutes. But is that going to change the trait? Is that going to make neuroplastic changes in the nervous system? Maybe over time it will. It could be problematic for somebody with anxiety because you flood the system with overbreathing. You're flooding the system with too much CO2, actually. And then you end up having the sensory input is huge and they freak out. So I think that I'm talking about Kundalini breathing from as taught by Yogi Bhajan, right? And just to be specific, and there's a place for that. I would never say never do it, but it's not the only way of doing yoga, and it's not appropriate for everybody. And that's why I go back to the Vini yoga tradition, the Deskachar tradition, because Deskachar was so here's this tool for this person, and you can try this, and you can try this other thing over here, or maybe you could try that and see if that works. And it's not a smorgasbord. It's very, very systematic. So you have this, potential kind of practice. You understand the neuromechanisms underneath it, by the way, not just the sort of experience, but you understand why that may help you. And then you use it over time to slowly make those trait changes, because neuroplasticity takes time, right? Yep. So you use it over time to slowly make changes. But when people have that idea of this is not a pill that's just going to change the way I feel in the moment, but is actually going to change my relationship with my anxiety or my depression or my trauma, then it just opens up their minds to the possibility that they can be a different person.
Yeah.
Right. And that's that for a lot of people go, I'm an anxious person, and they slap the label on their forehead and, and they decide, well, that's just who I am, but that can change. And that's the promise of these practices, which is quite mind-blowing, but it's not going to change if you just do every single thing you see on TikTok that. It's not the way it works, And
I think one of the kind of unfortunate things is people they get a taste because they do get a positive experience sometimes with one of those short practices. And they're like, oh, this is my thing.
Changes your state, right?
Yeah, this is my thing. And then they try and go back to it. And then one day it doesn't work. And they're like, oh, that doesn't work for me anymore. And they're done.
Oh, yeah. Or even worse, they think it works and then they make a whole business out of it. And they copy, because that happens a lot. And it's like the woman I was talking about with the shampoo, that sort of thing happens a lot out there. And we just have to be really careful, again, really discerning. I'm not trying to bring down anybody or anyone doing their thing. They're living their life, and there are really, really great teachers that have been around for a long time. Now, a lot of them aren't even on social media. Yeah. You have to find these people who actually can help you change. And it may it may take you a little while to do that, but if you're just, actor who's teaching yoga because that's what's going on right now, let's be honest, that may not be the best way to learn the depth of these practices,
Yeah. 100%.
So, yeah, it's tough out there. And how are we supposed to expect people who don't have any knowledge of the system and the depth of these practices to know? I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said things like, I had no idea that's what yoga was about. Many times, I had no idea. I thought it was just like stretching, So it's an issue. And like, it's not like what are you going to do? Like just quit because it's so frustrating? Of course not. Like we keep going, but, but you do. I think like kindly educating people about the potential of these practices to help them transform their lives and their relationships is really, it's just built into what it means to be a good yoga teacher these days.
And I think it's something that you actually said one of the first courses we did, which is kind of like, you're actually in sales. You're like, you have to sell. One of your courses talks about, selling the art of slow. And we always say this now. It's like, oh no, you're actually in marketing, to students with us, because it's like, it's not a bad thing. But if you're not actually educating people on why they would do something, it's so radically different to say the TikTok universe or the gym culture or the get it right now, that it's like, you really do have to sell why someone would invest to actually see if it works. I'm like, you can't do it for a week or even 3 weeks and be like, doesn't work. I'm like, at least do something for 3 months and then reflect and actually be like, is anything working for me? And understanding that this is a different approach and it's a lifestyle, but you've also got to have a level of embodiment, right? To be able to sense what's going in. Someone said to me the other day, it's like, oh, so this class, this is good for my nervous system because my doctor told me to come for my nervous system, which is great. Beautiful person, they're doing it. But I'm kind of even cringing. I'm like, well, yes, but it's like, well, yes and no, depending on your approach, how you're there, how you're interacting with the practices and your own kind of process of that and your environment that you're going back to all matter as well, and there's sometimes so much that we're like, how can we as teachers, like you say, in a very loving, subtle, nice way, be educating while offering the practices? And it is a challenging job.
It is so hard. Yeah, it's so hard. But to your point, like again, like people have the mindset of, I'm going to this class and I can turn myself off, because that's what we do in fitness. Well, that's what you can do in fitness classes. Just do what the teacher says. Then I don't have to participate in so much except just let my body do it. And I can do whatever, it can space out or whatever. And that's sort of the way we've been trained to do fitness classes. And since yoga, asana classes tend to fall into the fitness realm, that often is what happens for folks. And, it's okay. Like everybody is where they are, but having those little, like I'm all about having your little, the little phrases that you use. The pause is just as important as the pose. Those things that I say, all the time, like to have those little phrases to just reiterate and just be like, you can't make a judgment about this based on one experience. You have to try, which by the way, is a great marketing tool because you can say, please, you have to sign up for 3 months. If you don't, I can tell you right now, you will not get what you need out of this. But if you're here for 3 months, at the end of 3 months, you will feel different. I can promise you that. And if you don't, I'll give you your money back. Like, why not say that to people?
Yeah.
And you have to be here 2 or 3 times a week for 3 months. I guarantee something will change. And by the way, that's not selling snake oil. It's not like, not gross. It's not slimy, it's just real. It's authentic and it's accurate. So, I embraced marketing probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I was like, I can't take it anymore. I have to do something because I was seeing so much out there on social media. And I was like, I just have to, so I embraced it and I didn't like it in the beginning. I was like, oh, I feel so slimy. I can't do this. But my, the people that I've worked with have really gently guided me along until now I'm at the point where I'm like, marketing has made me so much of a better yoga teacher. And the reason is because I listen to my students more and what they want. And then I've got something that can help them, what they need, not about, and it's not about, the yoga abs or whatever. I mean, if you're teaching that, that's fine. That's none of my business. But in terms of the nervous system regulation, in terms of the mental health stuff, in terms of overcoming their trauma, all of those things, like when I listen to what they really need, I can be a much better, much more effective yoga teacher because I'm meeting those needs. And that's what marketing taught me. So I really see it as it sounds so gross, but I see it as kind of a spiritual practice because it's helped me to sort of step into my swadharma, my purpose, if you like. So I hope people who are listening who are yoga teachers take that in. You got to stop feeling bad about what you're, about doing marketing. You have to start feeling really good about it.
And one of our marketing mentors, you could say, said, we're no longer in the age of information. We're actually in the age of marketing. That's the age we're in. The age of information is over. We're in the age of marketing. And then if you look at social media, that's what it is. It's just that all of the time.
Yeah, we're getting marketed to constantly. And it's that is why, again, I go back to discernment. And we need discernment about everything, whether somebody is like, foisting their widgets on you or their whatever junk from China on you there, whether that's happening or whether you're looking at the yoga space to try and do more training, because there's just a ton of marketing out there about yoga. And the thing that blows my mind right now is sometimes I'm like, oh, that's an interesting ad. Let me look and see how that person is. And many, many times you'll see nothing about their training, nothing. Or maybe they'll say, I'm a 200 hour RYT 200, but often will not say who their teachers are, where they've learned this stuff. And that scares me, actually. I think that's a big problem because that means the loudest person gets the most eyeballs, and the one who's willing 100%. To give Mark Zuckerberg the most money gets the most eyeballs. And that's not, I don't think that's healthy. I think we need to come up with better ways of vetting the social media stuff so that people are actually learning good stuff about yoga. Because, you see it, and people tell me all the time, people will come to my trainings and say, I had to relearn everything because I didn't realize my training was not teaching me something that was usable.
Yes.
So
anyway,
we have
hard. It's a hard time
right now.
Like that. The whole there's no credential. And I think it's really hard, again, back to mental health, and whether it's therapists or people looking for this stuff, but don't even know what they're looking for. Even if there was the credentials, it's like, it's a pretty unknown thing unless you're a yoga teacher. You don't actually know what you're looking for. And that someone thinks, I did my kind of 500 or 200, 500 hours in a year, but I was full time and there all day and sat in on every private student and was teaching 3 months in and was just like, it was very full on. I thought that's what yoga training was. And then I went and did another one with a friend, which was 3 weeks in Bali. Now, let me just say, those two trainings were not the same thing. They weren't even in the same ballpark. In fact, half the time I was supporting the students on there, the training, so that they could just get through. We could spend a whole podcast talking about that. But it definitely early on, I was like, well, this is crazy. Like, how do I have the same qualification as this person when we are light years apart in our knowledge and wisdom? And I just come out of India. So I'm like, it is very crazy when people are looking to think that, to even think that you could learn any of this in a 1 month intensive blows my mind. And it's not disrespecting. I'm like, go forth. It's an amazing experience. But to go from 1 month of intensive training into teaching people who think you actually have integrated and know this, and you're 23 years old, I just don't see how it correlates, and you're teaching women who are going through menopause.
Especially when 50 of those 200 hours is about memorizing names of muscles and bones and things like that aren't really necessarily that important to teaching a yoga class and supporting someone's mental health or their nervous system regulation.
Yoga, which is just, slavery bypassing. I'm not a big fan of that either.
Well, it's, so we're in this, so here we are, and we're in this milieu now, and it's all over everywhere. And, with the pandemic, the 200-hour trainings went from there were 3 or something of 200-hour trainings online to thousands, so we're here, we're in the state. So that's why I always tell people, it's okay to open your mouth and be out there and be, just be forthright about what you're doing. Just be clear about it. It doesn't mean you're taking other people down, but you're clear about who you are and what you have to offer and why it's important. And when you get clear about that stuff, it's not so much putting on blinders, but it's more just about the path becomes very, very obvious. That's where I need to go. And this is what I need to do. So one of the things I did back in 2008, I think 2007, was I just decided, because I was seeing sort of a flow of that saturation happening where I live, especially, which is a very, very yoga centered area of the country. And I just saw there just was so much yoga out there. And at that time, I realized what I really have to do is start to work with healthcare professionals. Because if I could work with healthcare professionals and interface with them and teach them how to refer to yoga and teach them about yoga and stuff, that it would be a way I could serve the community. It would be a way I could get yoga out there in a bigger way. Because, the yoga, the wellness market, the studio market is where we see there's just too much focus there, whereas there's not as much focus in the healthcare systems. And I think that's the direction. Because then you have licensed professionals who have had to do their work. They cannot get around it. Not granted, that doesn't mean they're all great, but they have to get licensed. So if you've got somebody with a license and their license matters, they tend to have a little more discernment about other professions, And so that's why I started to realize that's where people need to be getting their information about yoga. Of course, it's not, we're nowhere near educating all the healthcare professionals yet. In the United States, there's 8 million of them. They are not educated yet, but moving into that realm gives us a little more of that clout that we get from that realm of the healthcare profession. I am under no illusions or delusions that it's a perfect system, but it's at least it's a place where we can sort of put some energy to help there be a little bit more discernment about what yoga that's therapeutic how that yoga can support people and how we can get to those people, because they're going to the healthcare professionals.
And they are asking, and that you're so right. It is this big thing of this transition period. And I think why we're saying infancy is that everything, even though it's been in the West for a while, it's all happened so quickly. And so all of us who are doing this, if we choose to be in more of the mental health kind of realm, the scope of how do we support people in this way, this trauma-informed way, is, really understanding, I think, that we are a part of that movement, a part of the change and a part of the system. And just like what you said with the marketing, to find how do we have discernment, how do we have empowerment to say what I do matters, my voice matters, and I'm actually allowed to go in and try and create something that's holding this structure.
And then we begin to have to kind of market to those healthcare professionals, and those skills fold into that. And on that note, we have a little. I've got a question written down here about that, and what kind of fears have you come up against from the healthcare professionals in these conversations around the kind of underlying perception shift or worldview shift around what yoga is and does, and all of those kind of things that come up with them?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I've found a lot of the doctors, they will lump yoga into the fitness right away. And a lot of them, the ones that are open to yoga, do a lot of exercise. They get it because there's a tremendous body of research since 1969. Kenneth Cooper came out with his famous book, The Aerobics. There's a tremendous body of research around the benefits of cardiovascular exercise, weightlifting, anaerobic exercise. There's tons of research about the health benefits. So they want to put yoga in that category right away. What is less well known are the benefits of interoceptive slow mindful movement That stuff, we're just starting to see some little bits and pieces of research, and most healthcare professionals don't know that. And so they can't conceptualize it. So the doctors have a little challenge, I found, with it. Whereas the mental health people are like, oh yeah, we know about breathing for regulating. Of course we know that, and we do it with our clients. So wouldn't it be interesting to learn more about that? Oh, and by the way, these breathing practices come from India. Interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. I thought they came from Deepak Chopra or Andrew Weil or something, actually come from India. Wouldn't it be interesting to know about that system? So I found that mental health people, professionals tend to be a little bit more open to this kind of way of practice, which, by the way, often I call inner size, to give it that opposite of exercise, right? So we're going to be doing inner size, nervous system regulation. Like, I'm working with this guy who runs an intensive outpatient program for youth, for 12 to 18-year-olds. And we've been working on a program where we're going to be training his clinicians in some really simple processes to use in groups, right? And one thing I thought was really interesting was, I was like, well, they're 12 to 18-year-olds, so they might want to learn things that are more active. And he said, actually, they all think they know exactly what yoga is because they've been so exposed to it, whether it's in school or treatment programs or whatever. And he said, I just want to do chair stuff with them. It'll feel much, I was like, chair stuff for kids. I kind of love it. Because most of them are really unable to sit in a chair and self-regulate and feel grounded. Like, what if we just work with chair stuff for kids? I never even considered it before I had this conversation, because I was always like, oh, kids are active, they need to move around, and sun salutations were made for kids. So but I don't want to train clinicians in that without giving them good, solid biomechanical training. But I can train them in chair yoga processes, of course, because we don't have the risk, and it's more meditative and mindful, and you can do a lot of cool brain balancing stuff. So, I think that there's a huge potential for interface between the yoga world and the mental health world. And as you said, it's just in its infancy. And I think we're going to see a huge shift. I think we're going to see a huge change. The risk, of course, is making sure that we're not just teaching mental health people stuff like square breaths or 4-7-8 breaths or pursed lip breath, and then saying this is what, because again, those are state trained trait tools. They need to be situated.
Yeah.
What?
It's that thing, if you do this breath and it will downregulate your nervous system, and it's like tick,
exactly.
tick, tick, tick. Not necessarily,
Right, exactly. And they need to understand those kind of practices situated in the context of the whole of the yogaverse. Like, they have to understand that there's something much deeper there. And if they start to understand the science behind it, the frameworks, the methodology and all that stuff, then they're going to have a deeper way of helping people. So,
which segues beautifully, because one, I really wanted to, because I love all your stuff on chair yoga, and I'm having a whole interesting experience with the chair and trauma sensitive stuff, and being like, there's something really amazing about turning up in a chair that equals a playing field that I don't even think people recognize, and that we're all just here in this position that we're in so often, and then we do it from there, and it's like, it's just, there's a normalcy to it. I can't even properly articulate, the experience of what it does.
There's a humility.
It
takes
powerful.
Really athletic variation for so many people who are so anxious about coming to class. Yeah,
but even for people who, like, they've just gone to their spin class or they go to the gym, but they come to this practice and we sit in a chair, and it's like this amazing thing of like, oh yeah, okay, I'm doing this. We're all in a chair, and then we're starting to do this really subtle stuff. And it's amazing. And one lady said to me, she's like, I don't know why this works, but I know that it works, And it's like, it's this beautiful, I really love the chair. I really rate the chair, and definitely encourage people to explore it more and be like, it's not just for elderly or people who can't do other things. There's actually, like you've talked about, a whole different realm of what the chair offers.
Exactly.
But also, sorry.
No, I just said exactly. takes you into your nervous system. It takes you into a meditative state. It gets you into mindfulness. I mean, there's so many uses for the chair, and to have it sort of, the idea that chair yoga is for old, sick, out of shape, and it is for all those people, but it's not all that it's for, right? And so people have the sense of like, oh, I'm, there's something wrong with me because I have to use a chair. Like we have to get rid of that preconception for sure. It's not what it's about at all. And there's a lot of potential, I think.
Yeah.
So, specifically
I've got one more question on my to-do list here. Well, I've got two more questions.
I was going to say, because she was touching on it, we were going there.
Oh, let's go there first then.
So, okay. So, and I know you talked about this before, but it's understanding also when we're talking about bringing in the scope. So we're doing some movement, we're regulating the nervous system, we're breathing. But can we speak about the importance of the yamas and niyamas and how you bring in yogic philosophy into these ideas? And it's, again, that shift of worldview or understanding something and understanding ourselves in a different context. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, so there's many creative ways to work with the yamas and niyamas, but I think that, the idea is that we kind of start slow, because people are coming in with the conception that yoga is about movement, right? That's the first thing they think. So then we can sort of start dropping it a little bit. Well, actually, yoga is about breath. And let me just make one point here before I get to the yamas and niyamas, is that if the thing that distinguishes yoga from exercise and from physical therapy and everything else is the breath, then why in the yoga world do we hyper focus on biomechanics?
Yeah.
Like, why don't we give as many cues about the breath as we give about how to move the body? Like that to me is such a logical progression of understanding of yoga. So, and if you have only been taught or have only understood that the breath is inhale, arms up, exhale, swan dive forward, let me tell you that there is a whole universe of breathing out there that will blow your mind, and will help you to understand how the prana is organized in your central channel in these chakras. And when you can access it, you can start to create much more energy, self-regulation, focus, attention, mindfulness, compassion, everything, because you have started to understand how to use your breath in a much more systematic way. So that's my big point before I even get to the yamas and niyamas is like, okay, let's talk about this breath stuff, because it's very important. And probably I'll talk about my meditation somewhere in there too, because the whole point of breathing and, or at least traditionally, and doing movement is so that you can settle the mind and meditate effectively, right? And people always tell me like, I can't meditate. And I'm like, let me take you through some breathing and some movement, and then we'll see if you feel the same way about that, And often they're like, my mind was clear for 5 minutes. That never happened to me before. And I'm like, yeah, because we used the system of yoga to prepare for the point of the system of yoga, which is to get deeper into that, into that open space. And then, yamas and niyamas are something that are essential because they help us to still the mind too, So you start with, are my actions in line with my values? Yeah. And people often don't know, a lot of people know what their values are, but sometimes people need to go deeper into that. So exploring the yamas and niyamas just gives you a framework for more deeper understanding of your values. Like, do I value non-harm? Do I value the earth? Do I value my family and my relationships? Like, when you start kind of unpacking that stuff, the yamas and niyamas become a really good framework for it. And then they go, okay, if I value that stuff, then how do the yamas and niyamas help me to kind of take my actions and my thoughts and keep them kind of focused in that framework? And then when I sit to meditate, I'm not going, oh, I said something really awful to that person, or I should have walked that back. I mean, sometimes you still do that too, which is good, because then you can write it down and process it later. That's good too. But the whole point of yamas and niyamas is to help you. There's several points, but I think one of the whole point is to help you to feel really, in line with yourself. And understand who you are and develop that deeper sense of identity from which a sense of meaning and purpose start to emerge,
Yeah. You were about to say our favorite quote, because if you don't know who you are, Kristine, you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? You can't have discernment if you don't know who you are. We are quoting you. We quote you a lot with this.
When you have that awareness, so how do you operationalize the yamas and niyamas in yoga? I think there's lots of ways to go about it. I like just letting people learn little principles one at a time here and there, focus on them for a week or two, see how truthfulness shows up in your life, see how, and I like to use brahmacharya and Ishvara pranidhana as sort of opposite sides of the same coin. Brahmacharya, the way that I translate it, is more etymologically accurate, which is, this idea of seeing everything outside me as a manifestation of the divine. Brahmacharya, Ishvara pranidhana, seeing everything inside of me as a manifestation of that cosmic consciousness, and then using those as the kind of the foundation of understanding of all the principles that revolve around it. So, I think just if you're teaching classes, helping people know that the yamas and niyamas exist, and that, stilling the mind is a matter of bringing your actions into alignment with your values. That's an essential part of it. I don't know. What do you think? How do you guys use it?
Well, one of the things that we do in our 200-hour teacher training is because our training's split into kind of a weekend format, and we actually use 11 weekends, but we use the 10 yamas and niyamas as each weekend they read the yama and then we reflect on it as a group. So we kind of sometimes it turns into almost group therapy, but this idea of sharing around each of the principles. And exactly that, how does it show up in your life for these 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long the space between is? And people go deep, and then they reflect on it, they write, and we see what they write, and we talk further about that one-on-one with them. And it becomes this amazing transformational kind of experience for people. We see there's such power in just those 10 concepts.
Yep. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was to say I've had such an interesting journey with it, and this whole thing of never wanting to use it in classes, or I think going to classes where a lot of kind of spiritual concepts have been, again, the lunchbox stickering, and so I never really felt okay to talk about it. I'm like, this is a lot of information if I'm talking about what the body is doing, your breathing, all of these other things, and then trying to suddenly bring in this bizarre lecture on the side. It took a really long time to feel okay to say anything. And then I'd say something, I'd be like, that's too much. Where is the sweet spot to layer these things in? So I definitely do. And it's like you say, it's like little pieces of putting them in lines of just this is what we might be looking at, or how do we actually find a sense of loving kindness? I recently was teaching in this idea of ahimsa, but referring to it as okayness. What would it be okay if it was just okay that you're here, or you're doing this shape? We don't have to necessarily have some lofty goal of, I love myself and I'm completely compassionate all the time. I think they get so lofty, and you've come to yoga and you're already overwhelmed by the fact that your life's not that great. You don't feel that good. And I'm like, okay, now today we're working on self-love because clearly I've achieved that. And so using an idea of, it could just be okay. And can we tune into the idea that maybe it's okay? But I'm interested in using it in more of a trauma sensitive, where there's a bit more, we're in chairs, right? It's a bit more conversational, and we sort of do a practice. And then I'm like, yoga actually has these concepts around it, this idea of that you can bring in and you can think about it in the practice or in your life. And we talk about the same, a little bit of ahimsa, a little bit of tapas, and svadhyaya generally. And just this way of, you can notice what's happening in your body, and this actually relates to the yogic path. So kind of bringing it in and trying to manage it, a level of dosage that is exciting for someone to want to be in self-inquiry, but isn't completely overwhelming where they're like, well, this isn't for me. I don't the ability to do that. So again, I'm always in this place of how do I want to share it in a class setting outside of a training setting? Because, it's like someone comes to training and they're like, I had no idea. And I'm always like, that's a shame. Like how do where's the middle? And so, yeah, for myself, it's always an evolving journey of how to land things in a way that's,
Yep.
Safely.
I know I used to be much more gabby in my yoga classes way back when. And my husband came to one of my classes. He was like, oh my God, you talk way too much. And then he said, I was like, thank you for being honest. And he said, why don't you just start a teacher training program? Then you can share all that stuff. Like, I think I think teacher training programs are great for that, but it would be so nice if people just took yoga programs, like just go deeper in your yoga practice. And it would be so nice if TikTok was full of yamas and niyamas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of just
and you're always trying to find the perfect unicorn workshop,
Yeah.
Like I just want the perfect work that just layers it, and then you can take it into your practice. And so it ends up half the time being in those conversations after class or before class, or we actually, with the new studio, we have we always have tea that's there now, that's brewed, and you come in and you have tea. And we've got things on the wall that kind of outlines a little bit more around yoga and the Eightfold Path and things, so that there's a point to even ask the question. Because then I think, well, people don't even know what question to ask, like how do I even invite the conversation maybe of what I'm feeling or experiencing, and what prompts can we put in the space that invites conversation, whether it's with us or together, and invites a level of inquiry where it's like, I'm interested. And then if the question's asked, you can go further, because I also don't want to, if someone's like, no, but I've come to do my movement. I'm like you say, well, that's where you're at. It's also not my role to take that away or push something else onto you when you're not ready to hear it. So it's always a little bit to and fro.
And it kind of falls into our final question, which I'm going to just slide in.
Okay.
What do you think about class numbers, group class sizes, and the ability to actually get the information across in a quality way? Do you feel like there's a tendency in our kind of economically driven world to try and get more bums on mats, as the case may be, versus trying to fold in the opportunity to have these conversations with students one-on-one, to fold in these concepts and ideas?
Well, I would just say, with all transparency, that I'm almost entirely teach online now.
Well,
I do teach some in-person stuff. My teacher training is in person, with the option to be online. And I didn't have any say in that because I do it as a faculty member at the Mountain Area Health Education Center. So most of my students are health professionals, mostly mental health professionals. But there's other people that come to it too as well. So, so with transparency, I want to say that. And here is what I have come to understand, which is that you keep your messaging kind of contained and smaller, and you repeat it, within that class. And so when students have questions for me, because I don't answer all their questions because I'm teaching online. There's plenty of people that are there. I can't talk to all of them. I don't answer all their questions. I have a Zoom call every month for the people that are in my membership. They can come and ask questions there, and we have these long kind of conversations like this that happen. So that's the way that I have adapted to the digital age. All that being said, I think if you are in a small group with a good teacher, you hit the jackpot. If you're live in a small group with a good teacher, there you go. I mean, it's an extraordinary, that's a gift to have in this day of YouTube yoga, in this day and age of YouTube yoga, So yeah, small is great. If that can happen that way, it's great. I did that for years and years and decades. I did it. And I got to the place where I was like, I need to have a bigger mouth. Have a bigger, not a bigger mouth, but a bigger what's it called? Megaphone. Like I needed a little bit more. Yeah, I needed a little bit more reach. I felt like that was the time. You see, you're doing your practice as a teacher, I hope, and you're reflecting on what your purpose is and what you're doing with your life. And you get to a place and you're like, this is the crossroads and I can go that way. And you take the path and you get to your next crossroads. And that's, and you make those choices. And I guess just because I've been teaching for so long, I'm approaching my 29th year, you get to that because I've been teaching for so long. I'm like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And not everybody has that sort of drive to want to reach lots of people, and it's not the best thing. It's just one way of teaching. So I want to be really clear about that. Like I taught small groups for years. I would come home and say to my husband, "Oh, only 3 people came to my class tonight," and he would say, "You helped 3 people." Wonderful. And he was always so super supportive of whatever I was doing. And he said, that's what you're meant to be doing at that time, and I completely believe that in retrospect now. It doesn't mean that any of it is ever easy. I really do feel like teaching yoga is a vocation. And if you're going to stick with it, like you stick with the ups and downs of it, because there are plenty of ups and downs, and we all have to find the ways that work. But to answer your question, like if you are able to have a small group of students and you're able to give them that kind of very personalized attention, like they're very fortunate to have that kind of interaction, I think.
And I just want to say, I love that it's like the word that comes to mind is responsibility. Like you recognizing the responsibility you had to your own journey with teaching, to what you've seen and what you've cultivated and been able to share. Because if you hadn't have done that, if you hadn't have gone online in the way you had, we personally would have never found you. We also know who we've recommended to you and how many people that we know follow you and have done your stuff. And it's like, it's just so amazing that you were able to, go through that journey. And then if you get to the crossroads, because you're reflecting, and then respond to the responsibility that you had for the wider yoga community and even now, the mental health realm. So it's pretty amazing that that you followed that. And like we talked about with marketing, and I just think when you said 5 or 6 years ago, I'm like, yeah, when we found you, because you put yourself out there to be found. And that so many people need to hear that part of like, if you don't put yourself out there, the ones who, I didn't know I was looking for you, like I didn't know that this was the style I would ever kind of lean into. And definitely like I've come from a really Iyengar way and do a little bit of both and bring it in and can see where the nourishing factors are and how to use them. And it's so it's just really beautiful that you are online and accessible. And for anyone who hasn't seen your stuff, I highly recommend looking at the courses. I think we've done maybe 6.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And the one we started with, I think, we started with the little why you should go slow one, but then we went to the neuroplasticity one, and it was at this amazing time where we both were really interested in neuroanatomy. Oh,
so sorry to interrupt, but what happened was I've been doing yoga, kind of full time in my training, and was very dedicated to the practice for sort of maybe 4 or 5 years at that point. And I realized I saw something on neuroplasticity, like a book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I changed my brain. And I had no idea what it was, but I only knew because I did it to my own brain. And I was like, I wondered like what had happened, because it was quite radical, really. And then when we found your course, it explained everything that had kind of happened to me and could then put language around it to tell other people, to be like, this actually is the possibility in doing these practices. So it was a really beautiful journey. And then we're just reading everything about the brain, going, oh my gosh.
And then I apologize to all of our past students and teacher trainings who have pushed neuroanatomy like down their throats. Like, you need to understand this. It's so important for yoga. Like, we don't care about the bones in the arm. I'm like, that's just the bones in the arm. Let's talk about the brain.
I mean, we still care about the arms, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it's interesting because I put that course out in 2019, I think, or maybe 2018. But things have changed. Like, I have to go back to that course. I did redo the Science of Slow, that first course. So that's if you haven't seen it, that's updated. It's not that different, but I had to make a couple changes. But because neuroscience is changing all the time, there's things I needed to add and shift in the yoga neuroscience connections. At some point, I'll get around to that
Right, but I mean, I think it's also the beauty of when we're, yoga teachers and in this, no matter how we're teaching and sharing, that the level of reflection and humility and continually learning to come back and go over. We always laugh. We're like, 1 year, like our manual will actually just be complete, knowing that will never, ever happen.
Will never happen.
It's always changing. It's always updating. But that is, like you say, it's just kind of the work that we're all dedicated to, and that you want that level of dedication. I see some teachers who are bored or it's the same, and I'm like, this just isn't the job for you, and it's okay. Keep practicing, but this isn't the job. It's not filled with accolade, and it's definitely not filled with ease.
Yeah.
It's very rewarding.
But it's fun, and it's like, if that's what you're supposed to be doing, that's what you're supposed to be doing. It's good. It's good stuff. And I would just say for folks out there who are teaching, like, just be okay with wherever you are. Like, you can only teach from what you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. And what's so beautiful about yoga is it just never ends. Like, I feel like I've only scratched the surface of what I need several more lifetimes. I'm not asking you for that, Sheila. I need several more lifetimes to really understand this stuff. It's just so deep, and beautiful. So,
well, do you have any closing words? Anything that's coming up on your horizon that you want to talk about before we close? In the fall, which will be your spring, in October, I'm having a training on sequencing. So if anybody's interested in that, that'll be a live training. It's sequencing for the nervous system.
Oh my gosh.
I'll be teaching. Right crowd.
So I will have a link for that probably by the time this goes out. I'll have a link for that. And also, I just did a 10-day chair yoga for brain health challenge. I did a bunch of videos, so that'll be out pretty soon too. My husband Brett is doing a yoga psychotherapy group online.
Cool.
That'll be coming out soon. I'm really excited about that because he's stepping into the online world.
Under the Subtle Yoga umbrella, or under his own?
Yeah, our company is called Subtle Health, and we both work under that. Yeah. Cool. So he'll be doing that online with my folks and stuff. So there's a few good things coming up, and of course, I hope everybody's watching this podcast and looking at your stuff and watching your other podcasts too. So you guys are doing great work. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing. And gosh, so much love to you. So far away.
But it's so beautiful that we could be here, and it is. Thank you for all the inspiration in both ways, and may we all continue to keep going, and we'll put all those links in the bio and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And
big namahi to you.
Yeah, we have to organize another one sometime soon.
That'll be fun.
Thanks so much, Kristine.
The Radical Awareness Podcast.